And welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I am your host, Brad Swale. Today I'm joined by James Quintero, the policy director for the Taxpayer Protection Project of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. James, how are you?
I'm doing great, Brad. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful, doing real good. It's beautiful weather out here in Austin. You're in Austin. I'm sure you're experiencing it too. And I get to talk to you today, and that makes it even better. So I gave probably the briefest intro possible. Tell me more about you and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, for those that don't know.
Yeah, no. What's funny is this week I actually celebrate 17 years with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. So
Congratulations.
I am an absolute dinosaur around this place. I've seen a lot. I've had a privilege of doing a lot. But I feel like there's so much more to do. We are on the cusp of some truly transformational changes at the legislature, and I am gung-ho for every single one of them. I've never been more excited about the potential for massive change, and I just want to see how these next 3 months play out because I think they're going to be pivotal.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to 17 years at any one location nowadays that's a lot. I mean, I feel like that's something that maybe our parents' generation did, but like this nowadays people don't do that anymore. It's like 3 or 4 years on to the next one. I don't know. So
I,
that's great.
So I used to tell my wife, as when I get bored doing what I do, then I'll go out into the private sector and find something that pays a little better and also allows me, maybe some opportunity to get away from the capital,
Sure.
stop being stuck in the downtown city center. And I tell you, I just never have gotten bored around here. There is something new and innovative and exciting almost every single day. And of course, I say that today I wake up almost every single day and turn on the news, turn on Twitter to try and figure out like what has happened in those 8 to 10 hours that I've been sleeping. What new and exciting thing has taken place and is going to affect the ongoings at the Texas Capitol. And almost every single day there's something like totally earth-shaking. So
James, I know that you're a father, and I'm a father too. If you're getting 10 hours of sleep, then I don't. I feel like I've been lied to by somebody, either you or somebody else. That's not possible.
so we have a strict 8 o'clock bedtime at my household. We banish all the kids to their rooms at 8 o'clock. My wife and I hang out for maybe an hour, and then I tell you, I've been going to bed really early these days. And then we wake up in the morning, and I try and figure out what the heck has gone on,
Sure.
and how can I use it to further the conservative cause at the Texas legislature.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come here today, and all the, everything that's happening. You're right. There's a lot of exciting things are happening, and I think that what we want to talk about today is property taxes and just sort of what they're doing in Texas. I know some people will, a lot of people say we should abolish them altogether. Other people say we need to, reform the system, close loopholes, this, that, and the other. Where do you see property taxes today? How are we doing in Texas?
Yeah, what a great question. And we should probably establish where we are right now
Yeah.
because there's a lot that's gone on over the last 2 years that's kind of led us to this point. But if we just take a step back and we remember back in June of 23, or at least the summer of 2023, the legislature had put the finishing touches on a massive tax relief package. In fact, this was an $18 billion tax relief measure that was supposed to lower everyone's tax bills by about $1,300 across the board. Right. And there were some added benefits for the elderly and disabled. And so we walked away from that legislative session thinking that we had really done something big and that was going to last a long time. And in year one, we actually, I think a lot of people really did see their tax bills go down in fairly dramatic fashion. Now, there was some variance as to, how much a home in Lubbock saved versus how much a home in Brownsville saved because there's some discretion in the process, but by and large, most people's tax bills went down.
Yeah.
What happened in year two is all of that savings went away for the most part. And again, there's a lot of variability because Texas is such a large state, but for the most part, as I travel around there and I talk to folks, most people no longer have any sort of savings left and their tax bills are actually up as compared to 2023. And so you scratch your head and you wonder, well, we just did the largest tax cut in Texas history 2 years ago. And now here we are entering a new legislative session, and everybody has these higher tax bills. What the heck happened? And I think what we didn't appreciate at the time, at least not fully, is that big old tax cut that the legislature provided really incentivized a lot of bad behavior at the local level. And what am I talking about? Well, we had a lot of really aggressive rate hikes.
Yep.
We had some really big bond measures, and we had some, I would say, the overutilization of non-voter approved debt instruments like certificates of obligation. Those three, I know that's a mouthful, right? Basically, what that is meant to say is cities and counties in particular went into debt without voter approval, right?
Okay.
And they had these special tools to do so. All of those things put upward pressure on people's tax bills. And some of it was eroded in year one, and a lot of it, or all of it, was eroded in year two. And here's probably one of the best examples. We're here in Austin. We have a very progressive school district here, Austin ISD. One of the things that Austin did for this budget year is they said, you know what? We're going to raise people's tax bills, right? And we're going to do that in two parts. The first part is we're going to raise rates just a little bit, and that will cost the average homeowner $200. But we actually want more than what the voter approval tax rate will allow. So we're
Yeah.
going to go ask people for permission to support higher taxes through a proposition. And that proposition cost another $500 for the average homeowner. So those two actions by themselves cost the average homeowner in Austin an extra $700. That's just one local government taking action on its own to raise taxes. And when you think about the number of local governmental entities that have their hands in your pockets, most people are subject to six, seven, eight, nine, even 10 local government jurisdictions. And you think about all the ways that they are chipping away at relief, then it becomes a bit more obvious how the biggest tax cut in Texas history could be evaporated in a very short period.
Yeah, I mean the AISD example, obviously I live in Austin as well and I'm aware of it. They did do, I guess they did it by the book. They went and asked people, "Hey, can we raise your
Yeah.
tax more?" But this is something I learned today, and I was not aware of this, and I'm a little embarrassed that I was not aware of this, considering the thing that I do for a living. But the 3.5%, so they raised it the $200, where they raised it the maximum, the 3.5%. And I've always thought that cap that was, I think it was put in 2 sessions ago, 3 sessions ago, uh,
2019.
2019. And something that conservative lawmakers tout as a success over and over. And I think that generally that's great. I'm glad that it's only 3.5%. But I was under the impression that it was on my property taxes, you can't raise it more than like my property taxes can't go up more than 3.5%. My appraisal goes down, like also, and I learned that the appraisal doesn't matter, doesn't make a difference. It's on the revenue, right? That the city or the school district or county or whatever, they can tax you as much as they need to increase their revenue by 3.5% next year.
That's right. So
That's
uh,
crazy.
it is crazy. A crude way to think about the system in Texas is to imagine almost an equation. Your rates times your values gives you your tax bill, or for the jurisdiction, their revenue, right? And what the 2019 legislation did is it basically put a trigger on the revenue portion so that some cities, counties, and special districts can't exceed that 3.5%. And for school districts, it's more of a hard cap set at 2.5%. Now, to make things extra complicated, what the legislature did for perhaps political expediency is they said, well, certain cities, 30,000 population and below, still operate under that old system. And your hospital districts and your community colleges also operate under that old system. And what that means is we have basically a two-tiered system in Texas where some local governments are allowed to increase their revenues by as much as 8%. And then for anything in excess of that, people are allowed to petition for an election to protest that level of increase. Right. It's a really hard and onerous requirement. And for others, for particularly in your larger areas, you have a system in place where basically there's a 3.5% limit. Anything above that requires the jurisdiction to go out and ask for the public's permission at an election.
Yeah.
Much better system, but there's some holes in there. In both cases, though, back to your original point, those revenue limitations are targeted at how much money the government is taking in, not how much you're paying in taxes as an individual. So, those two things translate a little differently. And you're right, even if your value goes down, the government can actually take more because they just do a rate adjustment and they put a greater burden on you as a result.
Yeah, I was a little upset.
Clear as mud.
Yeah, I was a little upset when I learned that today, and it was because I guess Truth in Accounting came out with their annual report based on the 2023 fiscal year. City of Austin is in the hole, and City of Austin's not unique in this. I think Dallas, Houston, the big cities in Texas generally are in the hole per taxpayer. Austin is in the hole for almost $12,000. And they said something about the property values going down 10% that year. And so that may affect the city's ability to collect property taxes. And I thought to myself, well, City of Austin, they're going to get their property taxes. They're going to do whatever they can. And then I learned, well, it has nothing to do with your value. It has everything to do with their revenue. And it just, the wheels started spinning and I had to take a little break from, doom scrolling for a little bit. So I know that Governor Abbott so before we get to that, there's other loopholes for this, right? There's the emergency declaration, right? If there's a declared emergency, I'm not sure. Does it have to be natural disaster? Can it be something like COVID? Can it be, I don't know, the lights go out for a certain, like, how do you, an emergency is declared, they can break that 3.5%. Is that correct?
That's correct. And in fact, in Travis County, I believe there's at least two, perhaps even three disaster declarations in place currently. And as I look outside, I don't see any fires, physical damage. There's no calamities. And so, to say that the disaster declaration exception is being abused is an understatement.
Yeah.
And it's allowing progressive cities and progressive cities and counties in particular to really raise the tax burden in some unfair ways. And in fact, one instance that I think has really gotten people's attention is actually Harris County, where as a result of Harris County's actions, there's a 10% increase that's gone into effect, which is absolutely mind-boggling when you think about the affordability crisis that's raging, not only in this state, but throughout. How any governmental entity can justify such a massive tax increase is just baffling. And that's really got the attention of a lot of very serious lawmakers who I believe are getting ready to advance some good government legislation to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen again, because it's really unjustifiable. But beyond the disaster declaration exemption, which again is being used in some unfair ways, that 3.5% trigger has some holes in it, even beyond, excluding certain governmental types. When you think about how it's adopted, it doesn't account for things like new growth, right? So what the governmental body does is they use certified values, which are basically a snapshot in time. And they say, look, as of this date, we think all values in the area are such, and therefore, City of Austin, you have to produce a rate that generates, as much as 3.5% in new revenue.
Yep.
Well, that doesn't account for all the new developments that come online, the new buildings, new commercial activity. There's lots of things that happen from one year to the next that provides probably 1 to 2% more on top of that 3.5% than what was originally allowed or accounted for, right?
Yep.
And there's another small but important way that governments are abusing the current limitation, and that gets back to that certificates of obligation point. So again, COs are these non-voter approved debt instruments that let cities and counties go into debt without voter approval. Well, when they do that, that extra debt that puts upward pressure on your property tax isn't included in the 3.5% either. So they actually have an incentive to max out the voter approval tax rate and then utilize other avenues like your CO debt to pay for extra stuff. And so when you think about this, the system as a whole, we have a fairly decent system, but there's some extra steps that need to be taken to shore up the mechanism, maybe even bring that 3.5% down to, I don't know, one lawmaker has a 0% threshold. And I personally love that. Maybe that's something we need to consider right now, given, again, the affordability crisis that's raging and the fact that a lot of people are just struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah, well, it sounds so the certificates of obligation, I don't know, it sounds like, I hear some people talk about, well, if the legislature never uh put this 3.5% cap on whatever city, if they never put that cap in place, then it'd be a lot easier to, fund, I don't know, increase in police pay on top of all the other programs that they do. And it's just this 3.5% it's really restrained cities' growth,
Hmm.
property tax growth, and the things that they can do. Now, love it or hate it, it's what you're describing kind of paints a different picture. Maybe they have to there's different mechanisms, different things that they have to do, but it sounds like they're able to do what they need to do or want to do, I should say.
Yeah, and I think that gets to actually one of the core deficiencies in our current environment is, we have a system where there's basically two types of cities. You have your general law and you have your home rule. Your general law cities are fairly prescriptive creatures, meaning they can only do what the legislature allows them to do.
Yeah.
And you have your home rule, like Austin, where they're allowed to do anything that the legislature hasn't prohibited. And that gives them lots of flexibility and lots of opportunity to take us in the direction of California-like cities, right? So Austin is renowned for borrowing bad ideas from the left coast to then implement and test here locally, and in some cases even spread them out to other home rule cities where I would say they find favorable adoption in your larger urban environments,
Yeah.
right? And what is the consequence of these things? Well, it tends to grow government, and it tends to suck up more resources, which puts upward pressure on your tax bill. So, a lot of city residents will foot a larger tax bill for progressive activism in home rule cities. And that's one reason why I've been excited to see the legislature engage in a greater level of preemption, meaning they tell cities, knock it off, get back to the basics, stop doing that bad activity. I'd like to see a little bit more of that, if only to make sure that our cities are doing what we all expect, which is to fill potholes, police the streets, and put out fires,
Yeah.
and stop doing all the California stuff that resulted in a broken state.
Yeah. So my understanding, I want to talk about Austin a little bit. The Ellen Troxclair filed bill, House Bill 3879, to sort of, I guess, close what is called a loophole where you take, I guess, maintenance and operation taxes and transfer them over to uh, what is Project Connect? It's a government corporation. What's it called?
Local government
Local
corporation.
government corporation. I just missed the L. And to issue bonds or something. I mean, what? And it's not just about Project Connect. It's about the ability for cities to do that anywhere because it creates a system where there's not a lot of accountability, is my understanding. There's not a lot of, you're using M&O to pay off these bonds, but that's not how M&O is supposed to be spent. What is your take on all that?
Yeah, it's actually a major problem in my mind. Do you remember the old Ghostbusters movie where they had this golden rule where you don't cross the streams, right? Never cross the streams.
Sure.
Well, what the city of Austin has done here is they've tangled up maintenance and operations money and INS, which is supposed to pay for debt service, right?
Okay.
So you've got two streams of property tax revenue. They're never supposed to cross, and they're for particular purposes. But the city, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to basically levy an M&O tax in perpetuity on people, on Austinites, and they've taken those monies that are generated annually, shuffled them off through some opaque system to this local government corporation, which is now using that revenue stream to go into debt,
Okay.
right? It's taking the money to Wall Street and saying, hey, we've got a secure money stream here. Give us lots of debt to finance this big government capital improvement project,
Yeah.
which, by the way, has ballooned in cost when they were originally talking about it, several years ago. And when voters approved, it was supposed to be a $7 billion, fixed rail system. Now, I believe to do that same project, it's upwards of $11 billion. And there's really not the level of resources to be able to carry it out. And also, the federal funding that they were counting on is perhaps gone away too. So they're in a real pickle as to how to execute on this particular project.
Yeah.
But even setting aside what the project looks like, they've engineered a system that I think is disingenuous and perhaps even violates existing law. So the legislature needs to do some cleanup system to say, look, we've got two buckets of money here that we're allowing you to draw from, and they're both for particular purposes. Again, the M&O is for day-to-day expenses. The INS is for debt service. You're not supposed to cross those streams. And when you do, there ought to be some sort of consequence. So what Representative Troxclair has done is, I believe, introduce some legislation to make sure that the M&O money stays in the M&O pot, and it's not allowed to be shuffled off to some third-party government where then it can be used in some really strange and shady ways.
Yeah, and you're right that the what was sold, what was told to the voters is certainly not what's proposed to be built now. It's a lot shorter and a lot more expensive, and a lot more buses and a lot less trains, and there's a lot to go in there. Um, when they go to Wall Street or wherever to get these bonds, and they say we have this revenue stream and it's the M&O taxes, is what is the risk? I've read that a future city council potentially, and again, this doesn't have to be Austin, it could be anywhere. If Houston or Dallas decides to do a capital improvement project this way, the same problems exist.
Yeah.
A future city council could say, well, we'd rather use this money on something else. Is that part of the problem?
Well, perhaps. One of the again, going back to what was originally promised,
Yeah.
right? Voters were sold a certain idea,
Yeah.
and that has not manifest because both exploding costs and long delays. So it's not out of question that voters could come back and undo those election results and say, look, we no longer want that dedicated M&O increase to pay for the project
Yeah.
because what you promised has not been delivered. And so we want to undo that thing and perhaps entertain some other proposal. Well, if if you've promised Wall Street that you've got a dedicated revenue stream of that nature,
Yeah.
and then voters come in and they say, no, 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 we want to go a different direction. Well, that really brings into question about what happens next. And I'm not quite sure,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be good for the city irrespective. And so, that's one reason why you're not really supposed to mix those buckets. If the city wanted a particular level of monies to set aside to pay for debt service for some bond, then it has the ability to do so, but that would have required voter approval.
Yeah.
That would have been the wiser route for them to say, hey, look, got this grand vision. We want to go into debt for it. We just need voter approval. And then through the INS process, they could dedicate those monies to pay for it over time. But
Yeah.
that's not what they did.
Sure. And so I briefly mentioned it earlier, and I want to. I think that you've also had upwards of 30 plus ideas that you've submitted to the Ways and Means Committee to rein in local property taxes. It sounds like spending is also something that needs to be addressed. Governor Abbott has talked about a two-thirds approval being required for bonds, and if I'm not mistaken, any tax increase needs a two-thirds approval. So the way that I see that, if I'm understanding it correctly, every year we have a tax election and two-thirds of the people have to approve it.
Uh,
Is that right?
so so for your voter approval tax rate elections, your VADERs,
Yeah,
all you need is a simple majority. You take it to the public and you get 50% point one approval and it's good.
that's the way it is today.
Today,
Right.
correct. Under the proposed reform, what would happen is it would kick up to about a 60% threshold. So you'd need supermajority approval. Um, and I think that's a much better approach because if you're going to commit people to a large tax increase in perpetuity, you ought to be certain that everyone, or at least most everyone, is on board with supporting that sort of commitment.
Yeah.
Because again, it's going to be a forever tax, and you're going to have to figure out a way to build that into your budget.
Yeah, a two-thirds approval. I think again, upwards of a supermajority. I don't know. Certain places I think will still be able to pass the tax rates that they want and bonds that they want, and that's but there is, I guess, that added protection. So you've submitted proposed 35 plus, I think 35 ideas to the Ways and Means Committee to rein in local property taxes. I mean, where do your ideas fall in the spectrum compared to, say, the supermajority that we just talked about?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, going back to the original point about what do we do about all these tax relief monies that have been evaporated over
Yeah,
time, I thought I'd put pen to paper and sketch out maybe a few different concepts. And what I ended up providing to both the House and the Senate is a list of 15 different M&O ideas, 15 different INS ideas, and five that I really couldn't find a category for, but I thought were too good to exclude.
sure.
And everybody or anyone interested could find that information at texaspolicy.com. Just look for property tax reform concepts. And obviously I don't have enough time to bore you to death with all 35, but I'll hit the high points really fast.
Well, what's your
In fact,
you could even just tell me your favorite. I mean, high points and favorite. Why not?
so here's one that I've been chasing for 10 years,
Okay.
and I'm not sure I'm going to get there this session, so it might be 12 years here soon, but I really think we need to tell people at the point of decision making what a bond is going to cost the average person. And here's what I mean. So let's say you're a voter, you're walking up into the voting booth to say yes or no to Proposition A, which is going to spend $100 million doing your favorite thing, right?
Sure.
The voter right now is provided with a short paragraph of legalese and the principal amount that the jurisdiction wants to borrow.
Yeah.
And my point has always been, look, people, that's not enough information for the average person to make an informed decision about whether to say yes or no on this thing. What they ought to be provided with is an extra data point at the very top of the proposition, a price tag, if you will, that says, hey, look, you can do this thing, but it's going to cost the average person in the community X number of dollars, right? That one data point, I think, would take us in an absolutely different direction when it comes to government debt, which, by the way, we have a real problem in the state with. Some new bond review board data came out here recently showing we have as much as $500 billion in total local government debt. That's every city, every county, every school district, every special district, all together. All of those entities owe $500 billion, which is about $16,000 per Texan. So massive debt. When you compare us nationally, we have the third highest local debt per capita among the top 10 most populous states. We're behind only California and New York. So we have a massive local debt addiction. And again, I think that one data point would would transform our local debt environment in some positive ways, or at least help people understand that there are tax implications to all of these bond proposals.
So we're third in local debt, half a trillion dollars, $500 billion, all local debt piled up, half a trillion dollars. People think of Texas as, conservative miracle, the Texas miracle, business friendly, all this stuff, low taxes. People move here. Oh, I don't have to pay an income tax, for instance, right? That's great. Cool. Awesome. But we still have $500 billion in local taxes that we owe. How did we get there? What's happening?
It's a great question, and I think this actually tracks back to uh, the tax relief that's being provided by the legislature because uh, for the last several sessions, in fact, I believe in every session since 2019, the legislature has stepped up and provided some level of relief, whether it's in the form of tax rate compression or a homestead exemption increase. The legislature has really been forthcoming with some relief. And you look around, you're like, well, where are all those tax cuts?
Sure.
And I think it's incentivized school districts in particular to go big on bonds, right? Go for those extra goodies, the extra frills, the palatial stadiums, whatever it is. We see lots of activity on the local debt front because in part those governments know, hey, the legislature just cut taxes. The average voter is probably not going to be as angry about absorbing a tax increase
Yep.
when their larger tax bill has gone down. And so, it's this odd tax cut, tax increase cycle where our local governments are just feasting on debt while at the same time the legislature is providing tax cuts on the regular.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like spending is a problem, locally, especially. And I feel like I think someone once told me that the, the way they look at it is they prioritize their spending over your ability to afford it. And that was in the context of sort of the emergency declaration. I think that the argument for the emergency declaration, that going above that cap, right, they would say, well, we need this extra revenue to, a hurricane hits Galveston. They need that extra revenue to repair the infrastructure, which I could wrap my head around. But then someone said, well, people need to be able to afford it. And if a hurricane just hit, that might be difficult. Is that an accurate way to look at it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear mongering in this space. I'm so old that I remember back in 2019 where we were trying to get that 3.5% limit in place. All of your large urban progressive cities came to the Capitol and tried to scare lawmakers away from voting for the measure. And they said, if this thing goes into effect, how are we going to pay our cops? We're going to have
Yeah.
to fire firefighters. EMS, oh my gosh, that's gone. And it's interesting now to look back at those comments and realize that there was no substance there. Really, this was an attempt to scare people away from fiscal discipline. And fortunately, it failed, right? Fortunately, we got some extra level of protection. Now, again, there's lots of work to be done there to strengthen it, but we did get some extra protection in place. What I think we need to do is ignore the noise and go big again.
Yeah.
We need to really put in place some strong protections that force our cities, counties, and school districts to prioritize according to need and not want. Because I think too many right now are either engaged in progressive activism and they want to do all those extra things above their core functions, or and maybe we do or do not have time to get into this. There's a lot of, I think, shenanigans happening, particularly among school districts, where they're being incentivized to go into debt through some pernicious political elements.
Okay.
And what I mean is, you have certain cottage industries that have developed around the bond issuance process. Things like your architects, your engineers, your bond lawyers, your construction firms. All of these folks have really developed into a rent-seeking class of their own, and they are prompting school districts to spend more in the hopes of getting the contracts once those bonds pass. And we need to break up that cartel that has really formed around the bond issuance process, and that's incentivizing school districts to overbuild and to engage in lots of excess. And so, um, there's lots of funny business happening at the local level that I hope the legislature really takes to heart and puts in place some strong measures to control moving forward. Because again, the bit of relief that I think is going to come to fruition soon is going to be evaporated very quickly unless we do something big on the tax reform side.
Yeah. Well, James Quintero, the policy director for the Taxpayer Protection Project at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I appreciate you coming on and going through this. I know for some reason, property taxes, I like talking about them. I don't know that it's kind of wonky, I guess, but it's also really important for people to understand sort of all the different ins and outs of it and how it works and why it does or doesn't work here or there. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that with me here today. Is there a social media or website that you wanted to plug before we go?
Yeah, again, most of the material that I talked about today is explored in greater detail at texaspolicy.com. And if you ever want to see me throw stones at local government bad behavior, find me on Twitter at James Quintero TX.
Awesome. Well, we'll put the links down in the description below. James Quintero, thank you so much.
Thanks, bro.